world where luxury and prejudice often fly side by side, one man's journey for respect turns into a battle that shakes an entire industry. When a renowned tech mogul faces discrimination on a routine flight, he uncovers a web of toxic behavior that goes far beyond a single incident. As tensions rise and alliances form, the stage is set for a confrontation that will test the limits of corporate responsibility and personal courage. But in this high-stakes game of truth and consequences, who will emerge victorious, and at what cost? And if you love your family and want to hear more incredible stories like this one, subscribe to our channel. The sky-high transcontinental flight took off smoothly, but the atmosphere on board was far from serene. Jake, a flight attendant with a history of problematic behavior, strutted through the cabin, his arrogance palpable as he sought approval from his colleagues. His eyes swept over the first-class section, deliberately ignoring Andre, a black multi-millionaire and influential Silicon Valley investor. As Jake moved through the cabin, he began making snide remarks about Andre's appearance to his fellow flight attendants. "Did you see that guy in 2A?" he whispered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Looks like he wandered into the wrong section. Maybe we should check his ticket again." His colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances, but none spoke up. The tension in the air grew thicker as Jake continued his passive-aggressive behavior. During the in-flight service, he approached Andre's seat with a forced smile. "Sir, would you like anything to drink?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Before Andre could respond, Jake added, "We have some items that might be more suitable for your taste." Andre, maintaining his composure, simply ordered a glass of water, but Jake couldn't resist pushing further. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer something stronger? It might help you feel more comfortable in this section." The comment hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone within earshot. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging shocked glances. A middle-aged woman 2 rows behind Andre audibly gasped, while a businessman across the aisle frowned deeply, his fingers hovering over the call button. Andre, however, remained calm. He met Jake's gaze steadily, his voice low and controlled as he replied, "Water will be fine, thank you." The dignified response seemed to throw Jake off balance momentarily, but he quickly recovered, plastering on a fake smile before moving on to the next passenger. As Jake moved away, whispers began to ripple through the cabin. "Did you hear what he said?" One passenger murmured to another. "That's completely unacceptable," another responded, shaking his head in disbelief. Andre sat quietly, his mind racing. He had faced discrimination before, but never so blatantly, and certainly not in a setting where he was paying for premium service. He knew that reacting emotionally would only play into stereotypes and potentially escalate the situation. Instead, he began to formulate a plan, his years of business strategy coming into play. He discreetly pulled out his phone, making a few quick notes. This incident, he decided, would not be swept under the rug. It was time to shine a light on the toxic culture that allowed such behavior to persist. As he looked around the cabin, he noticed several passengers watching him with sympathy and concern. He realized that he wasn't alone in this fight. He had witnesses, potential allies. As the flight continued, the atmosphere remained tense. Jake's behavior had set the tone for the journey, and passengers found themselves hyper-aware of every interaction between the crew and their fellow travelers. Andre, meanwhile, remained outwardly calm, but his mind was working overtime, planning his next moves. Little did Jake know that his actions on this flight would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of sky-high airlines and force a reckoning within the entire industry. The battle for respect and dignity was about to take flight, and Andre was prepared for the long haul. As the flight progressed, Andre carefully observed the reactions of his fellow passengers. He noticed several of them stealing glances in his direction, their faces a mix of sympathy and indignation. Seizing the opportunity, he decided to engage with those around him, turning potential witnesses into allies. During a quiet moment, Andre leaned across the aisle to the businessman who had frowned at Jake's behavior earlier. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I couldn't help but notice your reaction earlier. Did you hear what the flight attendant said to me?" The businessman, introducing himself as David, nodded gravely. "I did, and I'm appalled. That kind of behavior is completely unacceptable, especially from someone in a service position." As they spoke, a few other passengers nearby leaned in, eager to join the conversation. A woman seated behind Andre, Sarah, chimed in. "I've been a frequent flyer with Sky High for years, but I've never seen anything like this. We should do something about it." Her words sparked a quiet but intense discussion among the small group that had formed. As they talked, an elderly gentleman a few rows ahead turned around in his seat. "Pardon me," he said, his voice quavering slightly with age and emotion. "I couldn't help overhearing. My name is Mr. Thompson, and I'm afraid I've had a similar experience with this airline." The group fell silent, listening intently as Mr. Thompson recounted his own encounter with discrimination. "It was about 6 months ago," he began. "I was traveling with my wife, who uses a wheelchair. The staff treated us like we were an inconvenience, making snide comments about how we were slowing down the boarding process. It was humiliating." His story added fuel to the growing sense of injustice among the group. Andre listened carefully, his mind racing with possibilities. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "would you be willing to share your story more formally? I think it's time we took action against this kind of behavior." Mr. Thompson nodded firmly. "Absolutely. It's high time someone did something about this. I'm tired of feeling like a second-class citizen just because I'm older or because my wife needs assistance." As the conversation continued, more passengers joined in, each sharing their own observations or experiences. It became clear that Jake's behavior was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a larger problem within the airline's culture. Andre, drawing on his experience as a tech investor, began to outline a strategy. "We need to document everything," he explained. "Gather statements, collect contact information. I have connections in Silicon Valley that can help us bring attention to this issue." The group listened intently as Andre spoke, his words igniting a sense of purpose among them. They weren't just passive observers anymore. They were becoming active participants in a movement for change. "But we need to be smart about this," Andre cautioned. "We can't just rely on our word against theirs. We need evidence, a pattern of behavior that can't be dismissed as a one-time occurrence." Sarah, who worked in public relations, offered her expertise. "We should start a social media campaign," she suggested. "Create a hashtag, encourage other passengers to share their stories. The court of public opinion can be a powerful tool." As they discussed strategy, Andre felt a growing sense of determination. What had started as a personal affront was transforming into something much larger, a fight for dignity and respect that extended far beyond this single flight. The group spent the next hour exchanging contact information and making plans for after the flight. They agreed to stay in touch, to share any additional information or experiences they might have. Andre, with his resources and connections, would spearhead the effort, but each person had a role to play. As the flight began its descent, Andre looked around at the faces of his new allies. He saw determination, anger, and hope reflected in their eyes. The battle ahead would not be easy, but he was no longer fighting alone. Together, they had the power to demand change, to challenge the status quo, and to ensure that no one else would have to endure the kind of treatment he had experienced. The plane touched down, but for Andre and his newfound allies, this was just the beginning. The real journey, the fight for respect and dignity in the skies, was about to take off. In the days following the flight, Andre wasted no time in mobilizing his resources. He convened a meeting with his team of advisors in a sleek conference room overlooking Silicon Valley. The room buzzed with energy as Andre recounted the incident and the subsequent discussions with his fellow passengers. "We're not just dealing with one rogue employee," Andre explained, his voice firm. "This is a systemic issue that needs to be addressed at its root. We need to expose the toxic culture within Sky High Airlines." His legal advisor, Maria, nodded in agreement. "We'll need solid evidence to build a case. Anecdotes are powerful, but we need documentation, patterns of behavior that can't be dismissed as isolated incidents." Andre's PR specialist, James, chimed in. "We should start by reaching out to current and former employees of Sky High. They might have insider information that could be crucial to our investigation." As the team discussed strategies, Andre's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Sarah, the passenger he'd spoken to on the flight. She had started a social media campaign with the hashtag #RespectInTheSky, and it was gaining traction. People from all over the country were sharing their own stories of discrimination and poor treatment on Sky High flights. "This is exactly what we need," Andre said, showing the email to his team. "We're not alone in this fight. There are countless others who have experienced similar treatment." Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Andre and his team, their efforts were already causing ripples within Sky High Airlines. Sophia, a flight attendant who had witnessed Jake's behavior but remained silent, found herself unable to shake off the guilt of her inaction. During her next flight, Sophia overheard two of her colleagues discussing the growing social media campaign. "Did you see all those posts about Sky High?" one whispered. "They're saying we have a discrimination problem." The other flight attendant scoffed. "It's just a bunch of oversensitive passengers making a fuss over nothing. It'll blow over." But Sophia couldn't dismiss it so easily. She thought back to all the times she'd witnessed questionable behavior from her colleagues, the casual remarks and subtle discriminations that she'd brushed off as just part of the job. Now, faced with the consequences of such actions, she began to question her own ethical standards. That night, in the privacy of her hotel room, Sophia made a decision. She created an anonymous email account and reached out to the contact address provided in the Launch Respect in the Sky campaign. "I'm a current Sky High employee," she wrote, her hands shaking slightly. "I have information that might be relevant to your investigation." Back in Silicon Valley, Andre and his team were working tirelessly to compile evidence. They had set up a secure online portal where people could submit their experiences anonymously. The stories poured in, from passengers who had faced discrimination based on race, age, or disability, to employees who spoke of a culture of silence and complicity. Mr. Thompson, true to his word, had provided a detailed account of his experience, complete with dates, flight numbers, and the names of the staff involved. His story, along with others, began to paint a disturbing picture of systemic issues within Sky High. As the investigation progressed, Andre's team began to notice patterns. Certain routes seemed to have more incidents reported than others. Particular crew members were mentioned repeatedly in complaints. It wasn't just about Jake anymore. It was about an entire system that allowed such behavior to persist. Andre himself spent hours poring over the data, his determination growing with each new piece of evidence. He knew they were building something powerful, a case that couldn't be ignored or brushed aside. One evening, as Andre was reviewing the latest submissions to their portal, he came across Sophia's anonymous email. His heart raced as he read her words, realizing the potential impact of having an insider willing to speak out. "This could be the key we've been looking for," he murmured to himself, immediately forwarding the email to his legal team for follow-up. As the investigation deepened, the stakes grew higher. Andre knew that taking on a major airline wouldn't be easy. There would be pushback, attempts to discredit their efforts, maybe even legal threats. But looking at the mountain of evidence they had accumulated, the stories of hurt and humiliation from countless passengers and employees, he knew they couldn't back down. This wasn't just about one incident on one flight anymore. It was about changing an entire industry, about ensuring dignity and respect for every person who stepped onto an airplane. Andre leaned back in his chair, a mix of determination and anticipation coursing through him. The real battle was just beginning, and he was ready for it. The day of the meeting with sky-high executives arrived, and Andre stood outside the airline's corporate headquarters, his team of advisors by his side. The glass and steel building loomed before them, a symbol of the corporate power they were about to challenge. "Remember," Andre said to his team, "we're not here to make accusations. We're here to present facts and demand action." They nodded in agreement, each clutching folders filled with meticulously compiled evidence. As they were led into the boardroom, Andre took note of the executives' body language. Some seemed defensive, arms crossed and jaws set, while others appeared nervous, fidgeting with pens or shuffling papers. At the head of the table sat CEO Richard Hartley, his face an impassive mask. "Mr. Williams," Hartley began, his tone cordial but cool, "we appreciate you bringing your concerns to our attention. However, I must stress that Sky High Airlines has a long-standing commitment to diversity and inclusion. The incident you experienced, while regrettable, was surely an isolated event." Andre met Hartley's gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Mr. Hartley, I'm afraid that's not the case. What I experienced was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a much larger problem within your company culture." He nodded to his legal advisor, who began distributing copies of their report. "Over the past few weeks, we've collected testimonies from hundreds of passengers and employees. Each one details experiences of discrimination, harassment, or unprofessional behavior." The room fell silent as the executives flipped through the pages, their faces growing increasingly grim. Andre continued, his voice calm but firm. "We have documented patterns of behavior that suggest a systemic issue. This isn't about one flight attendant or one passenger. It's about a culture that allows such behavior to persist." One of the executives, a woman named Linda Chang, spoke up. "Mr. Williams, while these accounts are concerning, how can we be sure they're accurate? People often exaggerate when making complaints." Andre was prepared for this. He gestured to his PR specialist, who pulled up a series of social media posts on the large screen at the end of the room. The "Come on Respect in the Sky" hashtag filled the screen, along with video testimonials from passengers and former employees. "This campaign has reached millions of people," Andre explained. "The sheer volume of similar experiences suggests that this is far more than exaggeration or coincidence." Hartley leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Even if what you're saying is true, Mr. Williams, what exactly do you expect us to do? We can't overhaul our entire company based on social media complaints." Andre had anticipated this question. He pulled out a document from his briefcase and slid it across the table to Hartley. "This is a comprehensive plan for addressing the issues we've identified. It includes mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, a review and update of your discrimination policies, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to handle complaints." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Hartley picked up the document, skimming its contents with a frown. "This is extensive," he said finally. "Implementing something like this would be costly and time-consuming." "Not as costly as the lawsuits and loss of business you'll face if these issues aren't addressed," Andre countered. He nodded to his legal advisor, who presented another document. "We've calculated the potential financial impact of continued negative publicity and legal action. I think you'll find that the cost of implementing our suggestions is far less than the potential losses." The room fell silent again as the executives digested this information. Andre could see the wheels turning in their minds, weighing the costs and benefits, considering the potential PR nightmare if they didn't act. Finally, Hartley spoke. "Mr. Williams, while we appreciate your thoroughness, we'll need time to review this information and discuss our options internally. We take these allegations seriously, but we can't make sweeping changes based on one meeting." Andre had expected this response. He stood, gathering his materials. "I understand, Mr. Hartley, but understand this. We're not going away. The world is watching, and people are demanding change. You have an opportunity here to be leaders in your industry, to set a new standard for respect and dignity in air travel. I hope you'll make the right choice." As Andre and his team left the boardroom, he could hear the murmur of urgent conversation behind them. He knew this was just the beginning. The executives might try to minimize the situation to protect their bottom line and their reputation. But Andre was prepared for a long fight. Outside the building, his PR specialist turned to him. "What's our next move?" Andre looked back at the towering headquarters, his resolve strengthening. "Now," he said, "we take this to the public. It's time to turn up the pressure." As they walked away, Andre knew that the real battle was just beginning. But he was ready. The fight for respect and dignity in the skies was about to reach new heights. The day of the press conference arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Andre stood backstage, surrounded by his team and the allies he had gathered over the past weeks. Mr. Thompson sat nearby, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, while Sophia, who had decided to come forward publicly, paced nervously. "Remember," Andre addressed the group, "we're not here to attack. We're here to shed light on a systemic issue and demand change. Our stories are powerful. Let's use them to make a difference." As they took their places on the stage, Andre surveyed the packed room. Journalists from major networks and publications filled the seats, cameras flashing and microphones at the ready. In the back, he noticed a group of sky-high employees, their uniforms a stark reminder of why they were all there. Andre stepped up to the podium, his voice clear and strong as he began. "Good morning. We're here today to address a critical issue in the airline industry, one of respect, dignity, and equal treatment for all passengers and employees." He recounted his experience on the sky-high flight, not sparing any details. The room fell silent as he spoke, the weight of his words palpable. "But this isn't just about me," he continued. "This is about a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for far too long." One by one, Andre's allies took the stage. Mr. Thompson shared his story, his voice quavering with emotion as he described the humiliation he and his wife had endured. Sophia, still wearing her sky-high uniform, spoke about the toxic culture within the company, her voice growing stronger as she detailed the pressure to stay silent in the face of discrimination. As the testimonies continued, Andre could see the impact they were having. Journalists scribbled furiously in their notepads, while camera operators zoomed in on the speakers' faces, capturing every expression of pain and determination. Towards the end of the conference, Andre unveiled their crowdsourced database of incidents. "We've collected over 1,000 testimonies from passengers and employees," he explained, as a series of charts and graphs appeared on the screen behind him. "These aren't isolated incidents. This is a systemic problem that demands immediate action." He then outlined their proposed solutions, emphasizing the need for comprehensive sensitivity training, transparent complaint procedures, and independent oversight. "We're not here to bring down sky-high airlines," Andre clarified. "We're here to help them, and the entire industry, do better." As the conference concluded, the room erupted with questions. Journalists clamored for more details, for responses from Sky High, for predictions about what would happen next. Andre fielded the questions calmly, redirecting attention to the larger issues at hand. Outside the conference hall, the impact was immediate. Respect in the Sky began trending nationwide, with people sharing the live stream and adding their own stories. Social media exploded with discussions about airline practices and passenger rights. Major news networks picked up the story, running segments that featured clips from the press conference alongside interviews with industry experts. Aviation blogs and forums lit up with debates about corporate responsibility and customer service. Sky-High's stock took an immediate hit, dropping several points as investors reacted to the negative publicity. The airline's PR team scrambled to respond, issuing a statement that promised a thorough investigation into the allegations. But Andre and his team were prepared for this. They had already mobilized a network of supporters to keep the pressure on. Advocacy groups began calling for boycotts of Sky-High until concrete changes were made. Celebrities and influencers with large followings amplified the message, sharing their own experiences with discrimination in air travel. As the day wore on, Andre's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Messages of support poured in from around the world, along with offers of assistance from legal experts, diversity consultants, and fellow business leaders. By evening, several other major airlines had issued statements affirming their commitment to inclusivity and announcing reviews of their own policies. The ripple effect was spreading beyond Sky-High, sparking industry-wide conversations about discrimination and customer treatment. Andre sat in his hotel room that night, exhausted but exhilarated. He scrolled through the flood of messages and news articles, realizing that they had struck a chord that resonated far beyond what he had initially imagined. As he prepared for bed, his phone rang. It was one of his contacts in the investment world. "Andre," the voice on the other end said, "I think you've started something big here. How can we help push this forward?" Andre smiled, his mind already racing with possibilities. The press conference was just the beginning. The real work of creating lasting change was about to begin, and he was ready for the challenge ahead. In the days following the press conference, the pressure on Sky-High Airlines intensified. The company's initial response, a carefully worded statement promising an internal investigation, did little to quell the growing public outcry. Andre and his team knew that this was a critical moment. They had to maintain momentum while pushing for concrete action. Early one morning, Andre received an urgent call from his PR specialist. "Sky-High just released another statement," she said, her voice tense. "They're trying to downplay the whole thing, calling it isolated incidents and touting their existing diversity programs." Andre frowned, but he wasn't surprised. "They're in damage control mode," he replied. "But we're not going to let them off that easily. It's time to ramp up the pressure." Over the next few hours, Andre and his team crafted a response that systematically dismantled Sky-High's claims. They released a detailed report comparing Sky-High's diversity policies to industry best practices, highlighting significant gaps. They also shared more testimonials from employees and passengers, each one contradicting the airline's assertion that these were isolated incidents. As the back and forth played out in the media, Sophia made a decision that would change the course of the campaign. She walked into Andre's office, her Sky-High uniform neatly folded in her arms. "I can't be part of this anymore," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm resigning from Sky-High. I want to speak out, to tell everything I know about what's really going on inside the company." Andre listened intently as Sophia shared stories of systemic discrimination, of complaints ignored or suppressed, of a corporate culture that prioritized profits over people. Her insider perspective was invaluable, providing a depth of detail that would be hard for Sky-High to refute. "Are you sure about this?" Andre asked, knowing the personal and professional risks Sophia was taking. "Once we go public with your story, there's no going back." Sophia nodded firmly. "I'm sure. It's time someone stood up for what's right." The news of Sophia's resignation and her subsequent tell-all interview sent shockwaves through the industry. Other Sky-High employees, emboldened by her courage, began to come forward with their own stories. What had started as a campaign against one airline was rapidly evolving into a movement for industry-wide change. Meanwhile, Andre was working behind the scenes, leveraging his connections in the business world. He arranged meetings with key investors in Sky-High, presenting them with data on how the company's practices were affecting its bottom line and long-term viability. "This isn't just about doing the right thing," he explained during one such meeting. "It's about protecting your investment. The world is changing, and companies that don't adapt will be left behind." His arguments resonated with many investors, who began to put pressure on Sky-High's board of directors. The threat of shareholder action loomed large, adding financial urgency to the moral imperative for change. As the campaign gained momentum, Andre received an unexpected ally. A rival airline, sensing an opportunity to differentiate itself, reached out to offer support. They proposed a partnership to develop new industry standards for inclusivity and customer treatment. Andre carefully considered the offer. While he was wary of the company's motivations, he also recognized the potential for creating broader change. After consulting with his team and key allies, he agreed to the partnership, with strict conditions to ensure transparency and accountability. The announcement of this partnership shifted the dynamics of the campaign. Suddenly, Sky-High wasn't just facing public pressure. They were at risk of being left behind by their competitors. The industry was evolving, and they were on the wrong side of change. As weeks turned into months, the impact of the campaign became increasingly apparent. Airlines across the board began reviewing and updating their policies. Training programs were overhauled, complaint procedures were made more transparent, and diversity initiatives were given real teeth. For Sky-High, the pressure finally became too much to ignore. Late one evening, Andre received a call from Richard Hartley, the CEO he had met with months ago. "Mr. Williams," Hartley said, his voice noticeably humbler than in their previous encounter, "we'd like to talk. I think it's time we work together to address these issues." As Andre hung up the phone, he felt a mix of satisfaction and cautious optimism. This was a significant step, but he knew the real work was just beginning. Creating lasting change would require ongoing effort, vigilance, and a commitment to holding companies accountable. He looked out his office window at the city lights below, thinking about how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The fight for respect and dignity in the skies had gained altitude, but the journey was far from over. Andre was ready for the long haul, determined to see this through to the end. The emergency meeting of Sky-High's executive board was called to order in a tense atmosphere. The boardroom, usually a place of strategic discussions and financial projections, now felt like a war room. CEO Richard Hartley stood at the head of the table, his face etched with worry lines that hadn't been there months ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hartley began, his voice grave, "we can no longer ignore the situation at hand. The controversy surrounding our company has reached a critical point. Our stock is down 15%. We're facing potential class action lawsuits, and our reputation is in tatters." The CFO, Janet Moore, chimed in with a grim financial report. "Bookings are down 30% compared to this time last year. We're hemorrhaging money on crisis management and legal fees. If this continues, we're looking at significant layoffs, possibly even bankruptcy." As the executives debated their options, the door opened and Linda Chang, the VP of Human Resources, entered. She had just returned from a meeting with Andre and his team. The room fell silent as she took her seat. "Andre Williams has presented us with a comprehensive plan for overhauling our company culture," Linda announced, sliding copies of the document across the table. "It's extensive." The executives pored over the document, their expressions a mix of surprise and skepticism. The plan called for a top-to-bottom review of company policies, mandatory sensitivity training for all employees, the establishment of an independent oversight committee, and a complete revamp of their customer complaint system. "This is going to cost a fortune," One executive protested. "We can't afford this kind of disruption right now." Hartley held up his hand. "Can we afford not to do it?" he countered. "We're facing a crisis of confidence. If we don't take decisive action, we might not have a company left to save." As the debate raged on, Andre was across town, presenting his plan to a different audience. He stood before a packed auditorium at a major aviation industry conference, outlining his vision for a more inclusive and respectful airline industry. "The problems we've uncovered at Sky High are not unique," Andre explained. "They're symptomatic of larger issues within our industry. But we have an opportunity here, an opportunity to set new standards, to lead by example, and to show that treating all passengers and employees with dignity is not just the right thing to do, it's good business." His words resonated with many in the audience. Representatives from other airlines approached him afterward, eager to discuss how they could implement similar changes in their own companies. The movement was growing beyond Sky High, sparking an industry-wide conversation about ethics, inclusivity, and corporate responsibility. Back at Sky High headquarters, the board meeting stretched into the night. As dawn broke, a decision was finally reached. Hartley, looking exhausted but determined, called Andre. "Mr. Williams," he said, "we're ready to talk, but we have some conditions of our own." The negotiations that followed were intense. Andre and his team spent days in meetings with Sky High executives, hammering out the details of the plan. There were heated arguments, moments of frustration, and times when it seemed like the whole thing might fall apart. But slowly, progress was made. Sky High agreed to implement the majority of Andre's suggestions, with some modifications to address their financial concerns. In return, Andre agreed to work with the company as a consultant during the transition period, lending his expertise and the credibility of his campaign to their efforts. As news of the agreement broke, the reaction was mixed. Some praised Sky High for taking responsibility and committing to real change. Others were skeptical, viewing it as a PR move rather than a genuine commitment to reform. Andre knew that the real test would be in the implementation. He assembled a team of experts, diversity consultants, human rights lawyers, customer service specialists, to work alongside Sky High's staff. Together, they began the arduous process of rewriting policies, redesigning training programs, and restructuring complaint procedures. The work was challenging, often met with resistance from those within the company, who were resistant to change. But there were also moments of hope. Employees who embraced the new direction, passengers who shared stories of improved experiences, and industry peers who began to follow Sky High's lead. As weeks turned into months, the impact of the changes began to show. Customer satisfaction scores slowly started to rise. Employee retention improved. The tide of negative publicity began to turn, with industry publications praising Sky High's commitment to reform. One evening, as Andre was leaving Sky High's headquarters after another long day of meetings, he ran into Sophia in the lobby. She had been hired as part of the new oversight committee, her experience and courage making her an invaluable asset to the reform efforts. "Do you think we're really making a difference?" Sophia asked, a mix of hope and weariness in her voice. Andre paused, considering the question. "I think we're taking the first steps on a long journey," he replied. "Real change takes time. But yes, I believe we're moving in the right direction." As they walked out into the evening air, Andre reflected on how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The fight for respect and dignity in the skies was far from over, but for the first time in months, he felt a sense of genuine optimism about the future. The bright lights of the television studio were a stark contrast to the dimly lit boardrooms and offices where much of Andre's battle had been fought. As he settled into his seat across from the host of Sky Talk, a popular primetime news show, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. This was his chance to bring the message of respect and dignity in air travel to millions of viewers. Tonight we're joined by Andre Williams. The host began, her tone serious. Mr. Williams, you've been at the center of a storm that's shaken up the entire airline industry. Can you tell us how this all started? Andre leaned forward, his voice clear and steady. It started with a single incident of discrimination on a sky-high flight. But what I quickly realized was that this wasn't an isolated event. It was a symptom of a much larger problem within the industry. As Andre recounted his experience and the subsequent campaign, the host pressed him on the details. Some critics say you're overreacting, that these are just a few bad apples in an otherwise good system. How do you respond to that? Andre was prepared for this question. I wish that were true, he replied. But the thousands of testimonies we've gathered, from both passengers and employees, tell a different story. This is about systemic issues that have been ignored for far too long. Just as Andre was about to elaborate, the producer's voice came through his earpiece. We have an unexpected caller on the line. It's someone claiming to be a former colleague of Jake, the flight attendant involved in the initial incident. The host, looking surprised, addressed the audience. We have an unscheduled call from someone claiming to have insider information. Sir, you're on the air. Can you tell us who you are and what you know? A nervous voice came through the speakers. My name is Michael. I worked with Jake at Sky High for 3 years. What Mr. Williams is saying, it's all true, and it goes deeper than anyone knows. The studio fell silent as Michael began to speak. He described a culture of casual discrimination, of complaints swept under the rug, of employees pressured to prioritize profit over passenger welfare. His voice shook as he recounted specific incidents, painting a damning picture of life behind the scenes at Sky High. Andre listened intently, his mind racing. This unexpected testimony was providing a level of detail and insider perspective that they had been missing. It was a game changer. As Michael's call ended, the host turned back to Andre, her expression a mix of shock and curiosity. Mr. Williams, this is quite an revelation. Did you have any idea about the extent of these issues? Andre took a deep breath. We suspected much of what Michael has shared, but hearing it confirmed by an insider is sobering. It reinforces what we've been saying all along. This isn't about individuals. It's about a system that allows and even encourages this kind of behavior. The rest of the interview flew by in a blur of questions and answers. Andre spoke about the ongoing negotiations with Sky High, the industry-wide changes they were pushing for, and the importance of holding companies accountable. As the show came to a close, he made a final appeal to the viewers. This isn't just about airlines, he said, looking directly into the camera. It's about the kind of society we want to live in, one where everyone is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or what they look like. We all have a role to play in making that a reality. As Andre left the studio, his phone was buzzing nonstop. Michael's unexpected call had ignited a new firestorm of public interest. Social media was ablaze with discussions. Respect in. The Sky was trending again, and news outlets were clamoring for follow-up interviews. But amidst the chaos, Andre received one message that stood out. It was from Richard Hartley, CEO of Sky High. We need to talk, it read. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. This ends now. Andre stared at the message, a mix of anticipation and determination washing over him. Tomorrow would be a crucial day in their fight for change. As he headed home to prepare, he knew that whatever happened in that meeting would shape the future of not just Sky High, but potentially the entire airline industry. The battle for respect and dignity in the skies was reaching its climax, and Andre was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The tension in the conference room was palpable as Andre and his team faced off against the Sky High executives. CEO Richard Hartley sat at the head of the table, his usual confident demeanor noticeably shaken. The revelation from Michael on national television had clearly caught them off guard. "Mr. Williams," Hartley began, his voice strained, "I think we can all agree that this situation has spiraled out of control. We're here to find a solution that works for everyone." Andre leaned forward, his eyes locked on Hartley's. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hartley. But let's be clear, this isn't about finding a quick fix to save face. This is about fundamental change in how your company and this industry operates." As the discussion progressed, it became clear that Sky High was still trying to minimize the extent of the problem. They presented data showing a decrease in formal complaints over the past year, arguing that the issues weren't as widespread as Andre's campaign suggested. Andre's team was prepared. They countered with their own statistics, compiled from their crowdsourced database of incidents. "Your formal complaint numbers are down because people have lost faith in your reporting system," Andre explained. "They don't believe anything will be done, so they don't bother reporting." The back and forth continued for hours. Sky High's legal team argued about potential liabilities, while their financial officers warned about the costs of implementing wide-scale changes. Andre and his advisors stood firm, insisting that half measures wouldn't be enough. As the meeting stretched into the afternoon, tensions began to rise. Voices were raised, accusations flew, and at one point, Hartley threatened to end the negotiations altogether. It was at this crucial moment that an unexpected ally emerged. Linda Chang, the VP of Human Resources who had been quietly observing until now, suddenly spoke up. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the argument. "Mr. Hartley, with all due respect, we need to face reality. I've been compiling my own report on our company culture, and I'm afraid Mr. Williams is right. The problems run deep, and if we don't address them now, we won't have a company left to save." The room fell silent as Linda presented her findings. She had data on employee turnover rates, internal complaints that had been buried, and surveys showing widespread dissatisfaction among both staff and customers. Her report painted a picture of a company in crisis, one that went far beyond the public relations nightmare they were currently facing. Hartley, visibly shaken by this insider confirmation, turned to Andre. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Andre seized the moment. He laid out a comprehensive plan for reform, one that went beyond just sensitivity training and policy changes. He proposed a complete overhaul of Sky High's corporate culture, including 1. An independent oversight committee with real power to investigate complaints and enforce changes. 2. A revamped hiring and promotion process to ensure diversity at all levels of the company. 3. Transparency in reporting incidents, with regular public updates on progress. 4. A profit-sharing program that would align employee incentives with customer satisfaction, not just financial metrics. 5. Partnerships with civil rights organizations to provide ongoing guidance and accountability. As Andre outlined each point, he could see the executives exchanging glances. Some looked skeptical, others worried, but a few, including Linda, were nodding in agreement. Hartley, after a long pause, spoke. "This is extensive. Implementing all of this would be a massive undertaking. It would fundamentally change how we operate." "Yes," Andre replied firmly. "That's exactly the point." The negotiations continued late into the night. There were heated debates over specific points, compromises reached on some issues, and firm stands taken on others. But slowly, painfully, progress was made. As dawn broke, a tentative agreement was reached. Sky High would implement the majority of Andre's proposals, with some modifications to address their financial and logistical concerns. In return, Andre and his team would work with the company during the transition, lending their expertise and the credibility of their campaign to the reform efforts. As the meeting finally adjourned, Andre felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious optimism. This was a significant victory, But he knew the real work was just beginning. Implementing these changes would be a long and challenging process, one that would require ongoing vigilance and commitment. As he left the Sky High headquarters, Andre's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sophia. "Heard about the agreement. Is it real? Are they really going to change?" Andre paused before replying. "It's a start," he wrote back. "But the real test will be in the follow-through. Our fight isn't over, it's just entering a new phase." With that, Andre headed home, his mind already racing with plans for the next steps in their ongoing battle for respect and dignity in the skies. In the weeks following the groundbreaking agreement with Sky High, Andre found himself thrust into a new role, that of a watchdog and partner in the airline's transformation. The initial announcement of the comprehensive reform plan had sent shockwaves through the industry. Some praised Sky High for its bold move, while others watched skeptically, waiting to see if real change would materialize. Andre's team had set up a temporary office within Sky High's headquarters, a visible symbol of the ongoing collaboration and oversight. As he walked through the corridors, he could feel the mix of curiosity, resentment, and hope from the employees he passed. One morning, as Andre was reviewing the latest progress reports, his assistant burst into the office. "Andre, you need to see this," she said, handing him a tablet. On the screen was a viral video of Jake, the flight attendant, whose actions had sparked this entire movement. In the video, Jake looked directly into the camera, his face a mask of defiance. "I've been made a scapegoat," he declared. "Sky High is throwing its loyal employees under the bus to appease the mob. This so-called reform is nothing but a witch hunt." Andre watched the video with a growing sense of unease. This could potentially undermine everything they had worked for. He immediately called for an emergency meeting with the Sky High executive team. As they gathered in the conference room, the tension was palpable. CEO Richard Hartley looked particularly grim. "This video is gaining traction," he said. "We're already seeing pushback from some of our long-term employees. They're afraid they'll be next on the chopping block." Andre leaned forward, his voice firm. "This is exactly why we can't just focus on individual actions. Jake is a symptom of a larger problem, not the cause. We need to address the root issues in the company culture that allowed his behavior to go unchecked for so long." The discussion that followed was heated. Some executives argued for a strong public rebuke of Jake, while others worried about potential legal repercussions. Andre listened carefully, then presented his proposal. "We need to respond, but not just to Jake," he explained. "This is an opportunity to reinforce our commitment to change. Let's release a comprehensive statement that acknowledges past mistakes, outlines the specific steps we're taking to address them, and emphasizes that this isn't about punishing individuals, but about creating a better environment for everyone." After much debate, the team agreed to Andre's approach. As they worked on crafting the statement, Andre received an unexpected call. It was from Sophia, who had been working with the newly formed Oversight Committee. "Andre, we've uncovered something big," she said, her voice tense. "We've been digging into past complaints, and we found a pattern. Jake wasn't acting alone. There's evidence that some higher-ups were not only aware of discriminatory practices, but were actively covering them up." This revelation hit like a bombshell. Andre knew that exposing this could potentially derail the entire reform process, but hiding it would betray everything they had fought for. He decided to bring this information to Hartley immediately. The CEO's face paled as Andre laid out Sophia's findings. This changes everything," Hartley said, slumping in his chair. "If this gets out, we're finished." Andre met his gaze steadily. "No, Mr. Hartley. This is where we prove that Sky High is truly committed to change. We need to get ahead of this. Full transparency, accountability at all levels, no matter how high up the chain it goes." What followed was the most challenging phase of the entire campaign. Sky High, under Andre's guidance, made the bold decision to go public with their findings. They released a detailed report, naming names and outlining specific instances of misconduct and cover-ups. The initial public reaction was one of shock and outrage. Sky High's stock took another hit, and there were calls for boycotts and legal action. But as the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. Other airlines, facing pressure from their own employees and customers, started to launch similar internal investigations. The movement that had started with one incident on one flight had grown into an industry-wide reckoning. Airlines across the globe were being forced to confront their own shortcomings and biases. Amidst the turmoil, Andre received a call from a prominent civil rights organization. "Mr. Williams," the voice on the other end said, "we've been watching your work with great interest. We'd like to discuss the possibility of establishing an industry-wide task force on discrimination in air travel. Would you be interested in leading it?" As Andre considered the offer, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. What had started as a personal fight for dignity had transformed into a movement for systemic change. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, he felt that real, lasting change was within reach. "Yes," Andre replied, a sense of purpose filling his voice. "I'm in. Let's take this fight to the next level." As he hung up the phone, Andre looked out the window at the bustling airport in the distance. The sky was vast and full of possibility, and now, thanks to the courage and determination of countless individuals, it was becoming a place where everyone could truly feel respected and valued. The battle for dignity in the skies had been won, but the war for equality and respect in all aspects of life continued, and Andre was ready to lead the charge.